Now, one of the big stories coming out from the hurling weekend was the annihilation of Wexford by Clare. To get the Wexford perspective, I'm delighted to say Tom Dempsey is with us this morning. Tom, how are you keeping?
Morning, Ger. How are you? It's great. It's been a bit of a bad week for me, Ger. My two great loves are Wexford hurling and Liverpool FC, so I don't know which way to turn this week. Hopefully there's brighter days ahead.
Yeah, at least with Liverpool they can sign some players, but Wexford, maybe the injured players are the bit that you can hang your hat on. You were at the game. For anybody who didn't see it, what was there an ebb and flow to it? Was it like, what happened?
I think there were a couple of things happened, Ger, and I have to be very fair with Clare as well. They were bad as Oz was for Wexford, but they were an absolute pleasure to watch. You know, the Tony Kellys, the Aidan McCarthy's, the John Conlons. They were just outstanding. They were like a team that were going out in the first round of the Munster Championship, and some of their hurling was absolutely exquisite. So let's put that to bed. You know, they deserve a lot of credit for the way they played. What's happening, I think, at the moment, and I'm not looking for excuses. Wexford supporters, we don't kind of determine our love for hurling, and there's an incredible passion, a bit like Kildare yourself, Ger, incredible passion for hurling down in Wexford as there is for football in Kildare, but it's not determined by success. But it is determined by competitiveness. And sadly, last weekend, we just weren't competitive. And I think it was the first time in a while that I've seen maybe Wexford supporters leaving at half time. Now, in fairness to the lads, Ger, I just looked down through the names. The one thing that we're missing a little at the moment is physicality and a little bit of experience. And, you know, Liam Ryan, Lee Chin, Rory O'Connor, Matthew O'Hanlon, Kevin Foley, Mark Fanning, our goalkeeper, and then some of the younger fellas, Oisin Foley, Richie Lawler, Conor they were all in the dugout, or they were all in the stand. And probably compared maybe to the Limericks, to the Clares even of this world, we don't have the strength in depth. So what I think happened, and not to labour the answer, was that we went out without really our structure to our team. And my father used to always say that if you want to give young lads a run, put in 10 or 11 of your team and then put 3 or 4 young fellas in to give them a go. And I think what happened was when things went wrong, they went badly wrong. And maybe there wasn't that bit of experience on the field to turn it around. But that's no form of an excuse, because at the moment, Ger, we're not competing. We weren't competing, and we didn't have any great style to our play last weekend.
I think the main concern might be that this is a return to the dark days when the great Kilkenny team were handing out, as Sean Moran used to refer to them, the punishment beatings as a matter of routine in the Leinster Championship, and just how damaging that was for hurling people and their passion. Is like there was no sense of, it was a bit like the Leinster Football Championship in recent years. There was no sense of possibility or hope. Like the season started with, everything is a precursor to a routine defeat, and then for the last 5, 6, 7 years that hasn't been the case. So I suppose there's just those ghosts hanging around where that you really hope that isn't the case this time.
There is, Ger, and sadly, Ger, we were born beside a monster, and I'm not referring to Brian Cody now. I'm referring to Kilkenny. You know, I often feel, I remember when Waterford were badly beaten in the All-Ireland final back in 2008. I just saying to some people coming out, I mean, we had to get used to that for years. And the problem with Wexford when we were in that situation was that we were using Kilkenny as a barometer where we shouldn't have been. We should have been kind of using maybe teams that were lesser down the line as a barometer, but it didn't help us. And I think you've really hit the nail on the head. I think the lads will be back. I think one of the big problems is now that we haven't really formed our plan. I mean, a team needs to be playing, you know, for maybe 4 or 5 games before they actually formulate their plan. And I think that's going to be very, very difficult. So you've hit the nail on the head. The problem at the moment, and within the county at the moment, is morale and confidence. And that's pretty much at a low ebb now at the moment. But I would want to exempt. I remember, if you don't mind me telling you, Ger, I often think I was at half time last Sunday. I mean, we were 20 points. They'd scored 417. And I remember an old story, whether true or not, about Babs Keating. You probably remember it yourself, where he was in the dressing room. Cork were hammering Tipperary in a packed Thurles, and Babs came in, gave him the blood and thunder speech, said, look, lads, the bottom line is that we're in our own pitch. Where's the pride in the jersey and that? And then he shouted, are we going to win? To a muted response going out for the second half. He asked Joe Hayes, Joe is a great character, are we going to win, Joe Hayes? And Joe turned around calmly and he said, I think, Babs, if you were a betting man, your money would be on Cork at this stage, you know. And I don't know how true that is, but I'd say that feeling was with a lot of Wexford players last weekend. And the one bit of credit I give. They were a very young group of players. One bit of credit I'll give, they went out and lost the second half by 2 points, because I tell you, Wexford Park wasn't a nice place to be for a Wexford hurler last Sunday.
Tom, if you're to analyse the reasons for such a drubbing, like if you look at James Lawler's puck-out strategy, clearly Clare were happy to sit and let them have the short puck-outs, but there was a couple of the goals, in fact more than a couple of the goals, came from those basic individual errors, just dropping the ball. I think David Clark and Simon Donoghue maybe dropped a couple of slitters on a couple of occasions that led to goals. Is that the concerning thing, that it's just basic individual errors?
I think so, Shane. Call me a dinosaur. I'm in my early 40s now. Only joking. I'm in my late 50s now, and some people call me a dinosaur. But I think one thing that brought something home to me last weekend was the Clare goalkeeper just took a straightforward puck out at one stage in the first half. Ball went into our square, ball dropped, and Aidan McCarthy buried it. It took about 3 seconds. The way Wexford are playing at the moment, if the plan for the short puck out is not working, we're kind of we're not kind of reverting to the long ball. And I think we need to kind of change our plan a bit. Like, we would have had, Shane, 4 turnovers last weekend probably from short puck outs, and it wasn't James Lawler's, it was the game plan. It was James Lawler was doing what he was instructed, but we were getting the ball, trying to bleed, you're trying to go by the likes of Peter Duggan, big men like this, and we were trying to beat him, move it on to the next fella. When that wasn't working, and we had about 4 turnovers, I mean, Tony Kelly, these guys love that, and goals. I think we should have changed our strategy and went long, because at least if the ball is on the other end of the field, it's a less danger than what we were doing last weekend. So I think you really hit the nail on the head. The other strategy that we seem to have, we concede puckouts, but not only that, when Clare were winning ball, they were playing the ball across the full back line, 3 to 4 to 5. There was one point in the second half that John Conlon put the ball in the hurl, stopped. He actually stopped in the middle of the field. Nobody was going to him, and he just looked up and he picked somebody out. And I think if we don't start putting pressure up front to take pressure off the defence, we're going to have major problems. So, I think our strategy was wrong for last weekend, and I think we need to be able to mix that up a little bit. But that depends on winning your ball. But I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Shane. There was so many things wrong. And we've been down this road before, as you say, Kilkenny have done this before, and we had a great move with Davy. I just would not like to say that one swallow will define our summer. I think when we get fellas back, there's one major thing that I think is going to be in our advantage. Munster is Hell's Kitchen. And I would not like to be hurling in the Munster Championship. But if we can get it anyway right, we get the Chins back, the Rory O'Connor's back, but they need to come back very, very quickly. We can compete in Leinster, because, let's be fair, it's not as competitive. I'm a Leinster man, but I have to admit it's not as competitive as Munster. So that's one major advantage to us over the next, 2 months or, month and a half or whatever, however long we're in the Leinster Championship. But certainly we need to have a plan B, maybe a plan C. But we were going back to the same thing that wasn't working last weekend. And that really crucified us.
Are many of those players expected back in time for the championship?
Well, my understanding is they trained. I'm a Buffers Alley man and a Glenbarntown man. The kids play with Glenbarntown here, and they trained. I know Lee trained, and I think it's a cautionary measure with Lee. Rory has been back training. He's a long-term injury. So I think they're all back training now. Last weekend, and I think the pity for the younger fellas there, I don't like to use the term lambs to the slaughter, but when you haven't got your structure, you haven't got your Leachins, Hanlon is a great leader, guys like that, Fanning is a great goalkeeper. When you haven't got those guys there, it really does leave the young fellas in between a rock and a hard place. And that's what happened last weekend. But from my information, the boys are back training. But the only problem is, Ger and Shane, that you do need, and I think John Milan said last weekend, you do need 3 to 4 games to get yourself really right for championship. We're not going to have a great run into it now, in that we're playing Galway over in Salt Hill, which is arguably the toughest game in the Leinster Championship. We have to get them back. If they're ready to come onto the field now, we have to get them back next weekend.
Is there any talk within the county about Paddy Foley? I know Darragh Egan seems to suggest that he's not home at the moment.
You see, that's a difficult one, because Paddy is, if you're talking about team morale, so if somebody goes off to Australia, comes back 2 to 3 weeks before the championship, do you use them? Don't you use them? There's different views on that, because it can cause problems to morale, but also he's one of the best hurlers we've had over the last number of years. And I think one of the things that he's very, very important for, the man is a huge man. Chin is a huge man. Matthew Hanlon is a huge man. Rory's a big fella. These are all big men. These are the men that add physicality to the Wexford team. And this hasn't been there in the league so far. We've majorly had problems with physicality. But a short answer, as far as I know, at the moment, he won't be playing in the championship. He's still in Australia. But again, maybe somebody knows a bit more than I do on that one.
Can you take any strain of positivity out? It might seem strange, but a game like the weekend, Tom, because you think back to the football, we've talked about Tyrone, shipping 6 goals to Kerry in the league a couple of years ago, and they ended up having a bit of a team bonding session that night and going on to win the All-Ireland later in the summer. So I'm not saying that's necessarily what's going to happen to Wexford, but maybe you can take something out of this, and because it's such a drubbing, you can kind of reset.
Well, as the song says, the only way is up after this, but I think, you see, it's funny, Wexford are a peculiar county. We would have had an awful beating off Waterford in the league semi-final last year. We then got ourselves going, poorish enough performance against Dublin, but we're great people to reinvent ourselves. I mean, one thing I was just thinking, I think about hurling 24/7, and when I'm not thinking about that, I'm thinking about Jurgen Klopp and how much I admire him. But we didn't win a minor title from 1985 to 2019. That's 34 years. So for a county that's not doing that, we've been doing very, very well, given that we got a good return out of the 13, that 3 under 21s in a row. But we've been doing very, very well to reinvent ourselves. And all of a sudden then, when you think things are really bad, Wexford will come back and they'll beat Kilkenny in Nolan Park as they did last year. So, look, the positives, to be honest with you, Shane, I couldn't take too many positives out of last Sunday, because it was an almighty, 4-17 in the first half to 1-6 was probably as big a score as I've seen put up against Wexford, particularly in what we would call our little sanctuary, Wexford Park. There weren't too many positives. There were a couple of guys played okay. I think Shane Reck did well. The likes of going up the field a bit. Cathal Dunbar had a good game midfield, and Rory Higgins tried hard. So I think the secret is, if we had maybe 6 or 7 of our starters last week, I think what he needs to do is decide on those 6 or 7 and just hope, fingers crossed, that we'll get the other guys back and we'll get up and running for the Leinster Championship. And you know what? Not for the first time in Wexford. I would be hoping more than be sure about what's going to happen next.
Jamie Dominican's been in touch asking if Wexford could fall as far as Offaly have in recent years. I guess the difference is that the spine of the team is elite, and it's whether or not you have enough players who are putting the rest of the work in. And I guess the other aspect of this is that you talked about the absence of a minor title. It's okay if you're reaching finals and if you're reaching quarterfinals and moving on and players are being developed. Are the systems in place in your view at the moment?
There are systems in place, and I have to say it's not that there's not a lot of hard work going into the thing. And the management, very genuine fellas, Dara as well, very, very good guys, putting a lot of work. And we have been competitive at minor level in that. Of course, we've Galway now on board in Leinster. That's going to, I'd say we were one of the counties we probably weren't one to see them, but I think it's right that they're in the minor championship in Wexford. We've a very good guys just taking over as well at the moment. Niall Williams, he's a Westmeath man. He's director of hurling, if I give him the right title. He's putting incredible structures in place. There's been incredible work done over the last few years. I don't know what it's like in Kildare, but I'd often liken both counties. We're not really getting there, but there's a huge amount of work. Like, from Kildare's point of view, could you see where we are in Wexford?
I mean, you've opened a can of worms there, Tom. you've hit me right in my heart. I think that there has been a lot of effort made in Kildare. There's been an absence of joined up thinking. If you talk to people who have knowledge, it seems to me, for example, that in Wexford you've got the systems in place. You've a very progressive county board chairman who has really, I think, hit on something and identified what it is to be involved in Wexford GA. And so if there's a blip at the weekend, there's no chance of this turning into what happened to Offaly, where there's lost generations. I would say you guys are further down the road in terms of the organisational off the field.
Yeah, I think so. I would pray and hope that Offaly situation. We're still the group of players and the team. Now, my worry is that some of the players, some of our leaders are getting a little bit older, but we're still a group of players that could have beaten Clare last year in the All-Ireland quarter-final, that beat Kilkenny in Nolan Park. So, I don't think we need to talk about that just at the moment. But there are a few things in Wexford that really infuriate me, Ger. And one of them, and I could take a bit like yourself, I could talk all morning about this, but there's one of the things, we have a local club championship Championship. We have a split season in Wexford, right? And our club hurling needs to be strong for our inter-county hurling to be strong. But we have a split season now, and I just look here at the local Glenbarntown club. The hurling championship is run off probably in probably about 8 weeks. But some of the teams are out of the championship after 5 weeks. Now, what that means is the club hurler was finished hurling last August, maybe August the 2nd, and the next competitive match would probably be July, which is 9 or 10 months away. And that is no way to develop club hurling. I don't think we have a hope of improving in that situation. And we come in with little rules, which we've changed the minor grade back to 18 this year. I know it's 17 in which I think is quite correct. It's 17 nationwide or nationally. But Wexford put in then the kicker. Everybody wanted back to 18. Wexford put in a kicker that an 18-year-old then, fella that was under 18, couldn't play adult with his club. That's grand for the elite player that's getting plenty of matches. But I was talking to a young guy at the weekend. He plays for a non-fashionable club. His minor team next year are not going to be, they'll be gathering players to get games. They won't go very far, maybe get 3 or 4 games. So he can't play adult level for his club. And I just think that's crazy. I think we're not thinking through some of the decisions we're making. That's not going to develop that young player. And it just sometimes you sit back and you're perplexed by all this and saying, where do they come up with some of the ideas, really? And that, there's 100 different things that I think could be improved. But the GAA, for me, great organisation, whatever. But sometimes they're bringing out rules that are hamstringing themselves, really.
Yeah, there's definitely a period of unintended consequences of the split seasons that we're going to have to work through over the next couple of years and try and find common sense answers to most of the problems. But Tom, great stuff. Great to have you with us, and sorry for your trouble on the Liverpool front.
Look, lads, I have absolute confidence in Jurgen Klopp, I should say. I think he's going to bring us back. And listen, it's an absolute pleasure. Keep up the good work, lads. It's absolutely brilliant.
Thanks a million. Cheers. That's Wexford legend Tom Dempsey giving us some thoughts on the current situation.